The secret to quality editing is good contrast. Good quality contrast editing. That's it. That's all there is to it. All right, I'll see you guys next week. Just kidding, but not at the same time. Contrast is the key to quality editing. Because what is photography? Photography is writing with light. So it stands to reason that when you're doing editing, you're manipulating the light. Whether it's whites or blacks or colors, you're manipulating the light to create and increase more contrast. So this can be done in Lightroom, Photoshop, or pretty much any editing software there is. I use Lightroom and Photoshop. And I'm gonna teach you how to do very basic dodging and burning, which is lightening, dodging, and burning, darkening, to create depth and more interest in the image. Now, this is a very simple technique. It's gonna be simply brightening and darkening things. We're not gonna get into colors and stuff in this particular video, but I am gonna show you one way in Photoshop and one way in Lightroom to increase your contrast in your images. So let's start with Photoshop and let's increase some contrast. All right, so here we are in Photoshop and we have this image here that we are going to be working on. Now this, I've already done the edit. So let me show you the before. Just click this little eye here. Before, after, before, after. Now it's not much, it's a very subtle change, but you can see that there is a big change of depth in the image. So we're gonna do this, and I'm not gonna do the whole image, I'm just gonna show you how I did it. That way you can then go into your images and do it as well, because it would just take way too long for me to do this entire edit. That's why I wanted to show you the before and after first. So let's go ahead and turn this layer off. We'll select the background and press Command or Control J to make a copy. Now we have the basic unedited version. See, if I turn this on and off, I get no change. If I turn the edited, let's go ahead and rename this edited layer. Edited layer. So then, so you see the difference. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna select our background copy. Let's say dodge and burn, dodge and burn. Okay, good. What you may not know is there's actually a tool in Photoshop that allows you to dodge and burn, and it's super helpful too. On the left side here, go to this magnifying glass, and if you scroll over it, you'll notice that it says Dodge Tool. If you right click on it, you then have Dodge and Burn Tool, and we're gonna use both of these. Now the hotkey for this is O, so if you have the lasso tool selected, press O, and it'll automatically select your Dodge and Burn tool. Now we're gonna be using a combination of the Quick Select tool and the Dodge and Burn tool. So the Quick Select tool is up here, also hotkey is W, and we're gonna use both. So let's go ahead and zoom in here, and I'll explain how the dodge and burn tool works. So let's go over here where we have some highlights, we have some midtone, or we have some highlights, we have some midtones, and we have some shadows. So let's select the dodge tool, press O on the keyboard, make sure dodge is selected, and then let's change the exposure up here in the top middle to 100%. Now right now we have range, midtones. So if we select highlights and then we go ahead and paint on the highlights, you'll notice it gets really bright. It just overwhelmingly bright. So then let's select the midtones and do this on the same area, and you'll notice that it's a little bit different of a brightness. It's more muted, it's less of the blues which are in the highlights. Then let's select the shadows and paint it over there, and you'll notice it's very little because there's not many shadows here. But if we go down here into the shadow area, it's much brighter because it's brightening up more shadows. So the range, you're dodging, brightening the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights. Now let's go into dodge or burn, and let's select shadows and change the exposure to 100%. Now if we go into the shadows and we paint over the shadows, it gets really dark. If we go into the highlights, nothing happens because there's no shadows in the highlights. So you could do this all day and nothing is happening. But if you come over here, notice as soon as you find shadows, you then get an adjustment. So let's go into midtones and let's do that on the highlights. Now there are a few midtones in there, so you're gonna get a little bit darker. But if you go down here where there's more midtones, you're gonna get even darker. And then let's go into highlights. Now if we paint in the shadows, a little bit of occurrence, but really not that much. And then if you go into the highlights, quite a lot. So this sets your range. Now midtones do bleed into shadows and they do bleed into highlights. So you're gonna kind of get effects on midtones on the dodging and the burning no matter where you are. but shadows and highlights are quite a difference, so you're going to get a different effect. So let's zoom out here, press Command 0, and you'll notice our nasty adjustments here. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna delete this layer, drag it to the trash, and then we're gonna copy this one again, dodge and burn, and let's get started. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna zoom in, come over here to this mountain range here, press W on the keyboard for the quick select, and we're gonna select this little mountain range here. What this does is it keeps our adjustments, our edits in this selection area. It makes them much more precise. That way we don't get any overflow and we just adjust what we want to adjust. So once we have our selection made, press O on the keyboard, and we're gonna start with dodging, brightening. Select dodge tool, and up here in exposure, we're gonna change this to highlights or midtones, depending on the image. You're going to have to adjust it as needed. And then we're gonna lower the exposure all the way to about 4%. Very small adjustments, because this is really powerful and you don't wanna make it look weird. So then I'm using, to adjust my brush size, Control Command left click and sliding left and right. This allows me to quickly adjust my brush. I don't know exactly what it is on PC, but I am using a Mac. So let's make the brush fairly large, and we're just going to, oh, you also wanna come up here to the softness. Make sure you have a very soft brush. Anywhere from 0 to 20% is pretty good. I generally stick in like the 5% range for something like this. Size you'll adjust as you go along. So then just kind of naturally paint over just like that, very lightly. And then we're gonna go into the burn tool. Again, change it to shadows, scroll down to about 4%, and we're going to paint right there. Actually, nothing really happened, so let's go into the midtones here and paint right across, and there we go, a little bit of darkening, and then follow the line here. You see this line of lightness? So we wanna follow that there and go down until we dodge that part or burn that part, and then this one here, and creating depth. That's what this is doing. So then let's switch back to the dodge tool and make the brush smaller, and go to highlights, and then we're gonna paint right here to really accentuate. That's too much. So let's lower the exposure to say 2%. That's better. And just kind of enhance those bright parts. Remember, when you're dodging and burning, you want to enhance the light that's there. You don't want to try and like dodge a dark area unless you're trying to manipulate it a little, but you don't want to push it too far. Generally stick to the light and dark areas when dodging and burning, because that will make it look way more natural. All right, so once that's done, let's go ahead and zoom out and look at it. Press Command D to deselect, and here's the before, here's the after. That looks way better, much more depth in the image. So let's go ahead and zoom in again. Actually, let's Command Z and get our selection back, and let's zoom in again, space bar and click to move. And then we're going to now switch the selection, press W on the keyboard, right click on it, select inverse. This will allow us to have the selection of everything but this piece. That way we can then work on around it. So let's press O on the keyboard for dodge, and we're going to brighten up this area right here. So let's go ahead and paint here. And this takes a little bit of practice just to keep it in the lines, but remember, they don't really affect, like the highlights won't really affect the shadows, and the shadows won't really affect the highlights. But be careful when you're doing it. You wanna make sure you get your selections right. So we're just gonna go ahead and dodge up here, brighten it. Remember, the haze is below the mountains and the darkness generally is on the top of the mountains to create layers. So we're just going like this with the dodge tool to brighten these layers. And you'll find things like this that are dark and you can accentuate. So let's switch to the dodge tool here, the burn tool, sorry, and paint there. And you don't want just like a random strip kind of like that. You want to make it more natural. So just that's a little bit better. And then we'll dodge the top of the mountain here. And this is why you want a really soft brush, because you want a smooth transition between these different layers. And if you get a really harsh brush, it just kind of looks like a line and doesn't look good. So this is handling this stuff here. And we are doing good. Okay, so let's zoom out here. And there's a lot of zooming in and out to make sure it looks good, because when you're close up, you might not be able to tell exactly what you're affecting. So feel free to make changes, go back and forth a lot and really check it out. So let's Command D to deselect, and here's the before, here's the after. Very, very subtle changes, but it makes a huge difference. Remember, here is the after of the whole image, but this is a big difference already. And feel free to use the quick select tool to get those really perfect selections. You could just quickly do this, and then let's say I just want to do this mountain here. Sometimes it works better, sometimes it doesn't. If you're having trouble getting contrast, you can go down here to your adjustment layers and do a curves adjustment, and then pull down on the shadows, raise the highlights to create the really big contrast between the entire image. And once you've done that, you can come in here and it will be easier to quick select certain things. It just pulls the difference. It pulls more contrast and more difference between the different layers, so you can get more proper selections. So there we go. And let's get this little piece here. Another thing you can do is use the lasso tool. Press L on the keyboard. Press the shift key to get a plus sign, and you can add just like this. And you can do the same thing with the select, or with the minus on the lasso tool. If you don't want something, press the minus or the option key, and you can get rid of a selection. So there's two different ways that you can add selections if you need really, really precision selective parts. All right, press O on the keyboard, get the dodge tool, and we're going to dodge right here. Remember, we have the selection, so no big deal. And then we're gonna go here, the burn tool, and we're just gonna top off the mountain here. We're gonna change this to highlights because we want a little bit more. Let's see. Just kind of paint it gingerly there, and that should be good. Let's see the before. Oh, oops. This whole time I've had the curves selected, so that's not gonna work. So Command Z, let's select the right layer. Let's try this again, the dodge tool. There it is. Okay, that's why it wasn't working. Just go down the exposure. Nice little burn there on the top, and then we're gonna dodge. That's much better. Okay, before, after. And see this mountain right here, this one, before, after. It just creates depth. It's just a much better way of creating depth. And dodging and burning is used on every image, from portraits to landscapes to pretty much anything you can imagine. It just takes a lot of practice, and it takes some trial and error, because you're not gonna be good at it at first, and that's okay. I was terrible at it first. I would overdo it all the time. I still probably overdid this mountain here on the left, but that's okay. I would probably touch it up and adjust it. If you do happen to push something too far and you kind of made a lot of more changes and you're like, ooh, that doesn't look good, but you can't just Command Z it and go back, then you can always dodge a burned area and burn a dodged area. Your key things to remember here is using this exposure part here, because then you can adjust how much you want to dodge and burn, and it's very key there. So make sure that you play around. But that's the basic tutorial of dodging and burning in Photoshop. Now, you can do this if you're not Photoshop savvy, which a lot of people aren't, because Photoshop is a beast of a program and takes a lot of time. You can do this in Lightroom. So let's switch over to Lightroom, and I have a photo here. Now, this is after dodging and burning, and this is before. After, before. Really pay attention to the edge of the water and the lake, and the building in the lake, the tree on the right side. It is big difference. It adds so much change to the image depth-wise. Now, I did this took a little bit of time, so I've already done the edit, but the way I did it was using the brush tool. Simply select the brush tool up here, and then if you look here, this little dot is my burn. If I zoom in, you see all these lines here. I added all of these little lines, all of these ones here, all of these here. These are all burning. So these are just finding the shadows and darkening them. Notice the exposure is 0.55 down. I just added the lines on the shadows and then darkened the shadows. Then I did the same thing with the brights, the highlights and the midtones. Now I can't find my dot. Where is my dot? Here, dotty, 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 dot. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Okay, found my dot. So click this one, And here is all of the dodging, all of the lightning. So I didn't do near as much, but you notice I did between every slat here where there's no burning. I did here to separate the darkness that I put around the edge of the lake, and the water here really created that curve, that depth there. And so here is how you do it. Let's say I want to dodge this part right here. There's a couple of ways. So let's make the brush and let's make it the size of this trim here. So click there, press shift, and then click where you're done. Boom. That didn't work. Not exactly where I wanted it. Boom, done. That part is dodged. Let's say I want to dodge these slats real quick. Well, make the brush a little larger and click, shift, click. And this allows you to get perfectly straight lines. And this works when you have perfectly straight lines like this, but the theory is all the same. I'm just selecting and brushing the light parts, and then I am lightening those light parts a little bit lighter. And then I'm selecting and brushing the dark parts, and I'm darkening them. So there, I just dodged all of these slats. Let's turn that off. So here is the before, after, before, after. And that's a huge, huge difference just by lightening parts of the image and darkening parts of the image. Again, that takes a little bit of time, but it is a very easy way to create massive depth in your image. And you can definitely do this on your portraits, your landscapes, your car photos, your building photos, your architectural photos, pretty much any photo. You can use this technique to create massive amounts of depth. All right, and that's it for this tutorial. I hope this helps you create a lot more contrast in your images. Just remember, creating amazing images is all about manipulation of light. Whether you're taking the photo using proper lighting or you're in editing, manipulating the light. If you adjust the light correctly, the lights, the darks, the colors, and whatnot, you can create a much more contrasty and interesting photo. So if this video was helpful, you know what to do. Give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already. I do videos like this every Monday at 7 p.m. Also, don't forget to check out my Facebook group, Exploring Photography. I'll link it in the description, where you can share your work and you can ask for advice, you can give advice, and it's a great community where you can learn and grow and get additional data and information to make you the better photographer. Because remember, we're all in it to master the photo. So I'll see you guys next week.